I'm Mel and welcome to my Flosstube Stitching with Mel. Today is Flosstube number 10 and it is Wednesday the 4th of March 2026. I didn't feel like filming last night where I normally film my update on a Tuesday. By the time I got home from work I didn't have the energy to stitch or film, so I'm here filming it on Wednesday in my lunch break. Thank you for those who are joining me to see my progress. I really do enjoy sharing it and interacting with all of you. For those who don't know, I'm a predominantly full coverage stitcher, but I do have some non-full coverage projects. I stitch on either 20 count Eder 2/1 full cross or 28 count even weave 1/1 full cross. And if there's any variations, I will let you know. I also stitch most of my projects using Stitchy Mummy's typewriter method, picking a symbol in a 10x10 square and stitching it out as far as I can. If it does travel too far or hits the end of my workspace, I will park it. I try not to, where possible at the moment, I'm getting annoyed by park threads, so I'm trying to stitch some of those in. I think everyone goes through phases of what they're liking and not liking. I do have a couple of projects that are stitched differently, so if I do have any of those, I will let you know. So let's get into my week. It was a pretty good week. I worked on 9 projects and I did 4,086 stitches. I was getting very close to that 4,000 mark. Wasn't 100% sure where I was up to. And good thing I checked before I finished stitching for the night on Monday night, because I would have stopped just shy of the 4,000. So I put the extra 100 in to get it across the line so that it was a little bit more exciting than 14 less than 4,000. So let's get into those whips. As always, the first one I will show you is Temperature Garden by Zahara Design Studio off Etsy. This is stitched on 20 count white opalescent Eder and I finished February. So I put 205 stitches in this week, so it's now at a total of 1,691 out of 10,385 for 16.28%. But I've completely finished January and February, so they're looking really good. I really like that this is such a simple design but has a lot of impact still. So yeah, we'll start with the March flower which I think sits a bit higher, so I might have to move the Q stamp and might not get all the flowers in, but we'll see how we go. But otherwise very similar concept, slightly different flower structure, but we'll see some different colors potentially, although most of my summer has been the wrong colors. So you just might not see some of those reds and oranges anymore. But yeah, I'm really liking how that one's coming out. I think that temperature stitching is quite enjoyable for me. I know it's not for everybody, but I like seeing the difference in the weather from day to day. So that will obviously come out again this week. The next one I worked on is my Focus on a Finish, which is Sand Gnomes by Soda Stitch off Etsy. I'm stitching these on 20 count Eder in the colour Night by Patty Clean Designs. And I finished gnome number 6 for the year. So there he is, all finished. So to finish him off, I put in 1,281 stitches. There's no back stitch in this one for him to be complete. So I think it's really fun, him holding the lights, decorating the tree. And his hat definitely does not look like a crown anymore and does look like a snowflake, even though I think it's a bit hard to see on camera. It does show up a lot more, this middle section, in real life. But he was really fun to stitch. So then I started on the next gnome. So gnome number 7 for this year. And I put in 300 stitches on this one. and just all in the red. So it is 300 out of 2,000, and I didn't write it down. A little over 2,000, I believe, is in this one. So this week I put in a total of 1,581 into these focus piece. And it leaves me with 4,419 stitches to go until they're all finished. So I'll put at least another 1,000 into that this week. But I definitely will not finish this gnome this week. And my secondary focus on a finish is my custom piece of my dog Dizzy by Cross Stitch for Everyone off Etsy. He is stitched on 20 count Eder 1/1 full 2/0. And my next piece is my secondary focus piece, which is Dizzy, a custom piece by Cross Stitch for Everyone. And I'm stitching this on 20 count gridded Eder. And so I just worked in here, filling in this row, which was the bottom of his chin, and didn't quite make it to the other side. But even just adding in this part of the row got a lot more definition into his mouth. So I think he's really coming along. And I'll just unfold it so you can see where I'm up to on him. So I put 500 stitches in on this one for a total of 21,000 stitches out of 57,600, and I'm at 36.46%. So that's really exciting. So this week I will come across, fill in the rest of this row with his face, and then move into the background again. And I said last week the background is quite enjoyable to stitch. Watching the transition of colours. It's not block stitching. It's what the first colour is a bit confetti-like, and then the next colours are a lot quicker to fill in, so it moves more towards the block stitching. So that makes it interesting, and seeing how all the colours work together is good. So they are my focus pieces. So I'll put in another 500 on him this week. And then we get into my wheel spins. So every week I spin a wheel with you guys for the order and the projects that I'm going to work on that week, to work on the 6 projects, and I put 300 stitches in on each of them. So the first one that I spun was Between the Past and the Future by Eder Jose Rosa, charted by Stitches So Beautiful. This is on 28 count gridded even weave. And I was just filling in this top row in the dark background a bit more. And that's the whole thing as well. So it's now at 2,300 stitches out of 92,000 for a total of 2.50%. And I think that this block could be... No, it will keep going. I think I'm about halfway across the top row. I'm getting my projects confused. But yeah, the detail's starting to come through, but the top of it is a lot of the tree background. So not the interesting part just yet of the lions. But that one does remind me of The Lion King, which is why I chose it. It is my favorite movie, and I have just seen that Jade, the 310 stitcher, has purchased that and is going to be starting it in the near future, I think. So if you want to go check her out and see her progress along the way, that would be good too. The next one I spun was Hiding Place by Abraham Hunter, charted by the Cross Stitch Studio. It is also stitched on 28 count gridded even weave. And I'm still just working in this top row. And I am now at 7,400 stitches out of 506,627 for a total of 1.46%. So it's a bigger project. It takes a while to get those percentages up by doing the 300 a week, but it's still good to do. I'll unfold it so you can see all of what I've done. There's much more fabric still to go. There's still a while away. Let's see how close I can get it in picture. But I think you can already see some of it coming through. The trees and the sky and the leaves. The colours I think are stunning in this one. So even though it is predominantly background, until you get to the cabin, I am still really loving stitching it. It's very relaxing. I don't know, maybe I'm just thinking about that sort of landscape and how it's a relaxing space to be in. So maybe the project gives me those thoughts as well. The next one that I spun is Dragon Love by Cross Stitch for Everyone. And it is also stitched on 28 count, gridded even weave. And I was just working in this section of the second row here, filling in this swirl and across into there for its 300 stitches. And so it is at 9,900 out of 112,225 and 8.82%. And I'll open it up. And you can see I started page by page on this one and then converted to row by row. And when I got to the end of the top row, I started working back while it was in my Q-snap. But yeah, still got a bit of the row to go. But that one is pretty with the swirls. And it is actually a lot more confetti than you would think for the top of a project in background. I think it's going to have a lot of detail when it's finished though, so that's exciting. The next one I spun was a little batty, also by Cross Stitch for Everyone, and it also stitched on 28 count gridded even weave. So this one I removed the white from the top, so I'm only stitching the other parts, and I was working, so in this row here I was picking my symbols. So there's little tiny bits here where I picked a symbol, but the symbol carried right across, and this where all these parked threads are was the end of my Q-snap, so I couldn't carry those any further. So that's now at 2,300 stitches out of 95,199 for a total of 2.42%. And that is the calculations removing the white stitches. So it's accurate percentages of where I'm up to. And if I open it up, so I really wanted to try and get the top section of this leaf done, because that would have finished that row and I could have come down into this next row. Now it's not a full row, so I'm wouldn't count it as a row finish, but I thought it would be fun to then come back down to the next row and fill it in because it's a lot more solid. And the project does keep going across further, but I have to work down because of the white being removed. So I think that will be a lot easier to stitch once I get out of the top few rows and go back to filling in the solid shape of a typical full coverage, and not trying to worry. And there's a lot of the transition from the color that you probably can't see as accurately on camera, going from where it would be white to the darker threads. So there's a lot, and then when you stitch them by themselves, they're really hard to see. So it'll be good to get out of that part and be able to have more of an anchor to stitch off, because trying to find, what was it, 3865 and 3756 against the white gridded fabric is, when it's a single stitch, can be quite difficult. And also seeing on the pattern 3756 in Pattern Keeper does mark off as a slight blue, but it's so pale in real life. I'm looking for a blue stitch to check against, and I can barely even see the stitch that's there. So getting down to a couple more rows, even though that will take a long time, I think will make it a lot more interesting and a lot easier to stitch. The next one I stitched on was What Cookie by Randall Spangler, charted by Heaven and Earth Designs. And I just work through this section. So it's up to 33,300 stitches out of 183,200, and it's stitched on 20 count gridded Eder. So I stitched some of the black, blue and brown in this section, and then I've started stitching in, this is a book. So the stitches came down here, across the top, and then down. I don't know if that helps. And then a little bit is the decoration part on the book. I don't know what you call it. But yeah, so the stitches sort of travelled, so it wasn't as clear in the block what I stitched to get that 300, because they're a lot more scattered. So it was a lot more counting, but a lot more interesting than just all of this that I've been doing up here, which is about 4 colours, I think, predominantly black and 939. And I'll open him up. So yeah, you can see that those books will look like the books that are on the other side eventually. So I stitched that one by page for quite some time, and then have changed it, so that's coming along. And the last one that I spun was Checking It Twice by Donna Gelsinger, charted by Heaven and Earth Designs, and it is the max color version. And I just worked over this side in this section, which is the fireplace. It's really hard to, I can't really see if you can see all the color changes in there. There's a lot. But I've now put in 11,200 stitches out of 252,900 for 4.43%. And it's this one that the side of the pattern comes to this line here. So only have a small amount remaining on it, which will be good to get that first row done. It's always fun when you have the first row because you always have something to stitch to. So when you come back, even though it's a long way to get across, you sort of know how far you've got to go. So yeah, I started this by page. I've made quite a few mistakes in this section, but nothing dramatic. So when I come back and do row by row, I will be able to stitch around those mistakes and hopefully avoid too much frogging. That they are all coming along. So while sometimes 300 stitches doesn't look like a lot, and it definitely isn't a large percentage of the projects, I do get to see my projects a lot. I really like the 300 because I can do that in one stitching session. So I typically will stitch the 300 on the wheel spin, and then the rest of the night, if I feel like stitching some more, I will stitch on one of my focus pieces and spread it out that way. So I find that that's just quite a good balance. Last year I stitched 500. I had a different job, so more capacity to stitch a bit higher. But I was finding that when I started this job, they were carrying into the second day. And sometimes that meant I just couldn't work on as many projects. And as I have a lot of projects, I like to see work on them, even if it's not quite as much. And that 300 to 500 stitches is really good because if I'm working in a really hard or slow section, you sort of get out the other side you sort of get to a point before I get tired of stitching on it or slow right down. I think I stitch faster doing less. I know that's probably different for other people. Changing projects probably would slow them down, but I find that the more project changes I do in a day, I usually can get more stitches in. If I stitch a large chunk in one go, I find that I've slowed right down and it takes longer for every 100 stitches. So clearly I don't have the best attention span, and so small numbers are much better. Okay, let's talk plans. So as mentioned, I will work on temperature garden and put a couple hundred stitches into that. I will stick with the rounded hundreds throughout the month, and then when I get to the end of the month, I'll do what's needed to finish the month like I did in February. I just like stitching in 100 increments. It's good for my Facebook games, but it's also good for my brain. 84 stitches, for example, annoys me. I like them to be the round hundreds. Anyone that watches Anne, the Max Colour Stitcher, would know she likes her round numbers as well. She's a little bit more stringent with what numbers she likes, hence she stitches in 500 or 1,000 increments. But yeah, definitely the hundreds are important where possible. I will also work on my Santa gnomes for at least 1,000 stitches. Hopefully I'll get some extra stitches in there to get that all finished off. And Dizzy, so normally it would be 500 stitches for him, but this week is the week with only 5 wheel spins, so he will get 1,000 stitches in on him this week. So I think that will be really good. I will obviously start stitching in the last bit of his face and then move across into that background. I don't think it would get the whole row done. It is a little bit further than that, but hopefully we get a good chunk and get closer to the end. So maybe next week we get a row finish, but we'll wait and see exactly how we go with that. So now we will do the wheel spin. So even though there's only 5 projects left, I still spin for the order that I stitch in. I like all the decision making to be taken out of my stitching. I just like to stitch and enjoy it. So I know exactly what I'm stitching in what order. So when I sit down to stitch, I know which project to pick up. I don't have to think about what I feel like stitching on. Also means I won't put off any projects if I'm not really feeling it. And also why I use Stitching Mummy's typewriter method, because I don't need to pick which symbol or colour I'm going to stitch next, or where I'm going to stitch next, or it's all decided for me. So last week it seemed to work really well with me spinning on my tablet but inserting the picture at the same time. So you see what I see, just not with the glare. And this week I will show you where I'm going to be stitching. So this week was quite easy. I've got everything in my Q-snaps ready to go for the week. So I'll be able to show you where I'm going because I knew which projects were going to be spun. So we will start spinning. So for the first project, so it got Crystal Rose. So let's grab that. So that will be started in here, and we'll just be continuing in this top row in some yellows. And then I think if I get close enough to the end, it might change to some slight greens, but I think from memory that was the end, but that's been several weeks since I worked on it, so I'm not 100% sure. But we'll put 300 into that one. I'll give the artist and everything when I've worked on it because I don't want to get it wrong. Okay, so we'll do the next wheel spin. So the next one I'm going to work on is Waterhole Master. So this is my oldest whip. So this one should get what will look like a good amount of progress for the 300 stitches. So I've got to work in filling in these gaps. So all these colors, it's very confetti heavy. I'm in tree. So they've all carried quite a way across as I've been stitching, but not actually completing the 10 by 10 blocks. So I'm hoping that these symbols in here will make it look like maybe to somewhere in here, and we'll end up filling in the blocks and making it the impression of some good progress. So I think when it's scattered, it looks like less progress than when you fill in the blocks and it's a lot more solid, like this section. It looks like there's a lot more. Done. Hopefully they don't fall down. Okay. The next one will be Otter in the Water. This is another one that I'm hoping will end up looking like some good progress. So I've just got working still in his head in this row up here. So there's some stitches, I think they start back here to come across, but there's very few left now. So I'm hoping that it will end up looking like I've got quite a bit of progress in on this one. Not sure if it will get me all the way across into the water again, but hopefully it will look like several of these 10 by 10 blocks are filled in. I'll put that back that side so they don't fall down. Okay. The next one that I'm going to work on will be Harvest Moon. So that's still in the top row and we are in the night sky. So we'll just pick the colour from here and work it out across and see where we get to. And I don't know why that's all blurry, not focusing, but it's all 939 and 823, so not much to see yet. But we might get across into some leaf. I'm not really sure where the positioning is, but I think there'll be another leaf come in at some point. And just to spin for the final spin, the last one is Yin Yang. And that one's just here, so also just filling in across here, and this is predominantly in black, so with some colors coming through, but I think the remaining colors I've got is black, and if I remember correctly, we're almost at the end of that top row as well, so we'll see if that one can be a row finish. So they are all my projects for this week. Monday is a public holiday in Victoria in Australia. It's not an Australian public holiday, it's just a Victorian one. So I have the day off work. So hopefully that will mean I can get a few extra stitches in for the week and make more progress on gnomes, really. The rest I usually have been getting done. So it'll just depend on how many I can get into that gnome and how close I can get to being on the final gnome. I really don't think I'll get there this week. There's quite a lot to go, and there is the extra on Dizzy. So instead of just the wheel spin amount of 300, I up it to 500. So yeah, that will mean less can go into gnomes, but be interesting to see what happens next week. But at the end of the day, it's all just for fun and enjoyment and relaxation. So there's no stress about what I get done and what I don't. But that's all I've got for you this week. I hope everyone has had a great stitching week, and I'll see you all next week.